So when leaders are looking at that professional learning and reflection that you're talking about, the one thing that we would want them to be able to do is it wrapped around collaborative inquiry? What kind of reflection might that look like? John Hattie said to me a long time ago, if you're reflecting without evidence, then you're just remembering it the way you think it happened, not the way that it did.
That familiar voice, my Aspire Lead friends, is Peter DeWitt as he's talking through his new book with co-author Michael D. Nelson, Leading with Intention: How School Leaders Can Unlock Deeper Collaboration and Drive Results. In our conversation today, we're going to answer the question, what does it truly mean to lead with intention in today's fast-paced educational landscape? And I'm super excited to have Peter back on the Aspire to Lead podcast and meet Michael Nelson in this really impactful conversation. Before we dive in, though, I just want to let you know that Charlie Peck and I are super excited about the release of our brand new book, The Language of Behavior, which should be out in about 10 days or so. If you're following me on social media, you've probably seen posts as we've been documenting the step-by-step process, and we are done with edits. We've got the book cover, we've got endorsements done, and we're just pumped to have this resource out and available to everyone. If you're looking for more information, of course, you can head over to the show notes for a brief description of the book, also a link for the pre-order list, and then also you can go over to joshstamper.com for more information. All right, I'm super excited to get into this conversation as it's really packed with insights to help reignite your passion, strengthen your collaboration, and drive impactful change in your school community. So let's get to this awesome conversation with Michael D. Nelson and Peter DeWitt. Welcome back, everyone, to Aspire to Lead, where we will be discussing the visions, inspirations, and experiences from top educational leaders. My name is Joshua Stamper, and you can connect with me on Twitter or on Instagram at Joshua_Stamper. All right, welcome back, Aspire Leaders. I am so excited for the two gentlemen that are on my screen here as I get to talk to them about a wonderful resource and book, Leading with Intention: How School Leaders Can Unlock Deeper Collaboration and Drive Results. Michael Nelson and Peter DeWitt, thank you so much for being on Aspire to Lead.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for having us, Joshua.
Yeah. Well, Peter, you've been on before. So for those who are listening or watching on YouTube, make sure you head back to that episode. Peter does a phenomenal job and gives a lot of insight and wisdom. So I want to just highlight the both of you today. Michael, will you just share a little bit about your educational leadership journey and maybe why you even decided to write with this crazy guy, Peter?
Boy, I hope you have enough time for that to answer that question, for sure. I think I was destined to be an educator, and it was kind of built into me from the very beginning. My parents, every night at dinner, it was, Mike, there's no more noble of a profession than that of an educator. It's like, oh, okay. And so my brothers and I all became educators, and I took the traditional path. I really thought I would be a classroom teacher for 45 years and retire, and that would be a career. But I had the great fortune of others seeing things in me that I didn't see in myself. And I had the great blessing of moving into the principalship and then in assistant superintendent and then superintendent in the district that raised me. So I had the opportunity to give back to the community that gave me so much growing up. It's a small town outside of Seattle in metropolitan King County. My parents lived in their house for 55 years. So same house, same small town. And so to be able to give back to that community and a small town experience was incredible. The guy on your screen, after I left the superintendency, I feel the ability to go back to teaching again. I led professional development for the state of Washington for superintendents and district office administrators. Went through the interview process, received the job, and 2 weeks later it shut down in COVID. So that's the time period. And for this professional organization, like all professional organizations, professional learning runs the budget. So he had no choice but to offer things and tried to be creative. And so we offered this. Instead of an in-person conference, we offered June-tastic, which bringing somebody in different each day of the month. And the guy on your screen, Peter, was incredible at saying yes. From them, we joined a partnership and asked him to be the key advisor from one of our 2-year projects that received a state grant. And during that project, he asked if I would co-author a book with him.
Very cool. All right, Peter, would you just give a quick update on what's going on in your world? Because I know you've been on the podcast before, and I want to really reference that because I want people to go and listen if they haven't already.
So, I'll pick up sort of where Michael was.
Sure.
4 years ago, I met him when he asked me to do June-tastic. And honestly, I'm starting with that point because it was life-changing for me. Josh, I've been very fortunate over the years to write books and work with incredible people. But when I started working with Michael, it was just a very different experience for me. So over those couple of years that we did the Instructional Leadership Network, we became really close. And last year, I looked at him in like January and just said, "Will you write a book with me?" And he said, "I don't know if I could write a book with you. I always wanted to write a book. I don't know if I could do it." I was like, "Yeah, you could do it." And it just became this really fantastic experience. It was the first book I've ever co-authored with somebody. And over that time, we started facilitating workshops together. He encouraged me to start my own organization, which is the Instructional Leadership Collective, which he is the thought partner for, but he's really the partner in. It's been a really incredible couple of years and much to do with the guy that's on the screen with me.
That's wonderful. I love when that partnership happens kind of organically and the power that happens with that. And I'm curious just the inspiration behind the book, because I don't know about Peter, and you've written a lot of books, so this probably has happened to you a lot. For my 2 books, like it kind of is this like slow burning fire until I can't like resist it anymore. And then I have to put it on paper because I feel like it's something that's, needed and something I got to get out as far as, my own voice and some of the resources that I've touched on. So for you guys, like what was the inspiration and in your own leadership practices to make sure that this book is getting out?
My inspiration was Michael, actually. When we were working together on the ILN, I always did this work alone. Like I always partnered with the organization and I had some long-term work and stuff. But every time we would get together, he just has that systems district focus that I never had because I was never a superintendent. We would get together and then start presenting together. And he would ask me, have you thought about this? Or why are you doing it this way? Or even being in the audience, walking around when we had people standing up and talking, he would come back to me and say, I don't think people are fully understanding exactly what you want them to do. And to me, that was incredible, right? Because when you're facilitating workshops, especially when you're doing the one and done, it's just like you're given the content and you just assume everybody's understanding it because nobody's questioning it. And you're doing all these different ways to check for understanding. It's different when you actually have a co-teacher that you're doing it with. And I like to say that leading with intention is really kind of a diary of our relationship over the time that we started working together. Because as much as I thought I was intentional, I became much more intentional by working with him. And it was all of these things that we're doing together where we were kind of questioning, why are we doing what we're doing? How are we evaluating our impact? And just going that think tank of going back and forth. And that's really what the book is. So that's the way I look at the book. It's just, how can we lead, whatever that position might be, teacher leader, instructional coach, building leader, district leader, how can we actually lead with more intention? And I think for me, what's different about this book than maybe others that I've written alone is that Michael brings in that district perspective that I just don't have. And he has taught me so much about that. And I think that's within the book as well.
Yeah. What about you, Michael? What were your passions and intentions with the book?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I haven't thought about it in that way before, so I appreciate the way you framed that question. Here's what I did. After Peter asked, I said yes without even asking my wife. And we talk about all the things together. And so I called her and said, I just said yes, and it's going to be a commitment. Are you okay? And she's like, oh, well, finally. That was her response. Of course. It was not if you were going to write a book, it's when you were going to write a book in her eyes. And my kids were the same way. And so just like when I started as a principal and superintendent, you kind of do perceptions interview. And that's what I did. I went and talked with my wife, my kids, I wasn't working in the district anymore. And I just asked, you thought I was an okay leader. What was okay about what I did? And they gave me information. And the piece, I knew my value was always relationships, but it was always more than relationships in my head, but I couldn't describe it. And as those interviews began to happen, that was the really the foundation for what we coin human interconnectedness, which we believe is a step beyond relationships. It's all the intentional acts and behaviors that you do every single day matter in the big scheme of things. And it's not just relationships where you bring donuts on payday and you say, "Ooh, I'm a principal. I have great relationships with my staff because I bring donuts on payday." It's deeper than that. And we tried to describe that in chapters 1 with, are you self-aware? Are you empathetic for yourself and others, and understanding that point of view, going into then what is human interconnectedness? So the first 2 chapters were really the things that got me started into the thought process of this book.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought those 2 things up. I want to touch on the self-awareness component.
Mm-hmm.
I know for leaders, I know I was the same way, was that we get into busyness and everything else gets pushed to the side. And I think starting with the self-awareness component is huge. Peter, maybe you can start with this. How can leaders begin to build or strengthen their own self-awareness, since it's so important?
Great question. One of the ways is to just surround yourself with good people. And I don't think that's a huge aha moment. I think many people would tell you that, but it is very different. It feels different. I was given the example of working with Michael before.
Mm-hmm.
You can work with really good people that you learn from, and you collaborate pretty well together. But there's a different feeling when you have 100% trust. And when the person gives you feedback that you need, that you don't even know you need. And that's Michael's role with me. He will give me feedback that sometimes I don't even know that I need, but I'm open to it. Because the number 2 thing would be that I always have a learner's mindset. So leaders should always have that learner's mindset. There's such, you were saying it best, Joshua, that there's such pressure because of all the things we have to get done, that we don't often get the opportunity as leaders to have that learner's mindset. And we need to be able to go into things like observations and walkthroughs and faculty meetings, all those things with a learner's mindset. So that's really important. And when you open that up, you will find that there will be people that will give you that kind of feedback that you need. And when it comes to internal and external self-awareness, we also know that there's research to show that we don't know what we don't know. And that's another reason why we have to be open to spending time with people that are going to be open and honest with us and give us feedback. So we explored internal and external self-awareness. So internal self-awareness is how well we know ourselves as leaders. We can use that as the example. That's what we used in the book. External is what people perceive about us as leaders. Michael talked about a perception survey. There are ways that you can do perception surveys where you're asking the right questions to get those kind of answers. So when we're thinking about the kind of evidence that we need, our leaders actually collecting evidence to understand the impact that they're having. So if you're doing that perception survey and you're asking some pretty specific questions and you're getting that feedback, is that going to help you with that external self-awareness? And I would say the last thing is to pay attention to when it comes to internal and external self-awareness and the whole role of feedback is we recently learned some research about feedback sharing versus feedback seeking. Feedback seeking would be where a leader might go up and I'm Michael's principal. And I would say, Michael, I'm working on my leadership. How do you think this is going? And Michael might not feel comfortable with me. So he's just going to say, oh, I think you're great. Or maybe he has an issue with me and he's going to say, sit down, this is going to be a while, and gives me a lot of information that wasn't actually on my radar, because when I was asking for feedback, I had something specific in my head. What feedback sharing is about, and this comes from Adam Grant, what feedback sharing is about is when you go up to Michael and say, I'm really working on my instructional leadership. I've gotten feedback before that I need to strengthen it. These are some of the things that I've been doing. How do you feel about, how am I doing where that's concerned? I'm giving him insight into the feedback I've received in the past, but also asking him about something specific. He is clued into, oh, this is something Peter cares about. It's about instructional leadership. He's doing the work about it. So I can give him this feedback that I'm feeling. So those kind of conversations can be hugely helpful when we're looking at internal and external self-awareness. And what we've actually expanded on since writing the book is that internal and external self-awareness isn't just about our leadership. It's also about our initiatives. We always take for granted that we know why we're grabbing the strategy or the initiative or the implementation that we're doing. But if that external self-awareness is not there, where people don't understand why we're doing it, they don't understand our logic, that's going to crush us as leaders as well.
it's a beautiful system. And I love it too, because sometimes as administrator or a leader, it feels like you're drinking from a fire hose, especially with that feedback. If the whole staff is providing that versus what you're talking about is more of a funnel where we can really be specific and focus on maybe one or two things versus a million. So I love that. Michael, I want to throw it back to you. You had coined the term interconnectedness, human interconnectedness, and I want to kind of dive into that more. So how does nurturing human interconnectedness among staff contribute to better decision-making or just like the overall well-being of everyone in the building?
Well, thanks, Joshua. I think that I'm going to connect the two. So here through a story and things that actually happened. So I have two brothers, one that's 8 years older and one that's 15 years older than I am. And the brother that's 8 years older was a teacher in the system when I first became a superintendent. And, and I'm out in the schools, and I was in his school, and I'm walking around, and he called me that night and he said, "Dude, do you realize you're not just Mike anymore? You're the superintendent, and people panic when you walk into their rooms." And I'm like, "No, they don't. I'm still Mike." And he's like, "No, you're the superintendent." So if you want to change that, you need to think through strategies around that. That was like blinding flash of the obvious. It was like, I was an okay teacher. I was a pretty successful principal. Now I'm in the superintendent leading a system, and the suit guy walks in, and I'm Mike in my head, and my brother Tim is saying, "You're not." And so it shifted a lot, and that external perception is really key. You need to listen. So, for example, trivial things, but they're small things that add up. So the previous superintendent was in the back office, and the back was not accessible. You always had to make an appointment. We were a district of 4,500 students, 8 school buildings. People thought I was crazy, but I moved my office to the front. I parked in the furthest parking stall. People knew my car. It was all of a sudden bringing that level down that my brother Tim talked about, and getting myself into classrooms, and not just, oh, something horrific happened in this school building. So, the superintendent, of course the superintendent is going to show up, or some celebration is going to happen. Of course the superintendent is going to show up. Superintendent is going to show up all the time. And shifting that culture began to create this, what we call human interconnectedness, but not only around relationships, but around being colleagues. So when I'm there, I had teachers, I was there 14 years. And so, teachers were saying, "Did you see what I just did? Was that the right teaching move at that? Or would you have done something different?" It's like, oh, when that happens as a superintendent, I was like, "Ooh, joy, where's the cameras? Get that on film," because that's what I wanted. And that's what my wife and my kids saw, and the people that I talked to saw. And why I should write a book, that's kind of a story about human interconnectedness that ties to internal and external self-awareness.
Yeah, it's a beautiful model. I love it. Peter, I'm going to throw it back to you. And, we had talked just quickly about the fast-paced world of leadership, administration. I know for growth, personal reflection, that can be a really difficult thing. And sometimes guilt is associated with that, or maybe the idea of like, I need to be there for everyone at all times. And so, maybe it's, I don't want to go to my office for 30 minutes to get that personal reflection or personal growth, or I don't want to go to a conference and lead my staff and my students. So, for those who are listening, I know that's a big problem. I hear that all the time in regards to that growth piece. How can people create or maintain a personal learning environment for themselves?
Well, I think they have to shift the way that they're looking at that, right? Because they're looking at it from a guilt standpoint of, and I get it, I can't be out of the building for a day, or I can't go back to my office for 30 minutes. What they really need to look at is what that would be doing for them if they're doing it with authenticity. If you're going back to your office for 30 minutes to engage in some deep professional learning, and that is going to impact students and teachers within your building, then you have to look at it that way as opposed to a minus. Michael recommended a book, Both and Thinking. And we often think it's black or white. We can't do this. We have to do this instead. And the reality is that that's not the point. I often look and say, from a de-implementation standpoint, when I wrote a book on de-implementation, it was really interesting because it was about abandoning low value practices. And I surveyed well over 1,000 people. And when I surveyed them after the book had come out and asked them what they would abandon, what low value practice they would abandon, 100% of the answers were all about what was being done to them, not something they were doing themselves. And that was amazing to me, because I thought, where you so easily think that thing coming at us is a waste of our time, but everything we're doing is fantastic. When leaders are thinking about their busyness, and I know this is a big answer for that question, but when they're thinking about their busyness, part of what they need to be able to do is really look at how they're spending their time. I get it. I looked, when I was a principal, I went through my schedule and looked at what are those times when I can get into classes? What are those times when I can be back in my office and do those things that I need to be able to do? And yeah, much of my reflection may have been on the 25-minute drive in or the 25-minute drive out, but it also really meant that I need to look at my calendar and understand where I was spending my time. If leaders look at how they're spending their time on those mostly normal days, because often I get pushback and they give outlier days. I'm not talking about outlier days. I'm talking about those mostly normal days, and they look at how they're spending their time. What I want them to consider is, do you have 20 minutes to a half an hour to be able to commit to yourself, to be able to focus on some sort of professional learning? And part of why Michael and I wrote Leading with Intention is for that very reason, because what people often think of when they think about professional learning is we're going to go to a one-day conference. And I'm not saying those are bad things at all. But what we're looking at is, how do we go deeper over a longer period of time? We have the Global Instructional Leadership Network. We have about 70 people that are signed up for that from across North America. And they come in every month and work with us for an hour and a half. They're making a commitment to being there because they know in that 90 minutes, we're going to tie it's going to be coherent from one session to the next. It's going to be wrapped around collaborative inquiry. It's going to be wrapped around a need that they have. It's going to be wrapped around evidence that they can collect. So when leaders are looking at that professional learning and reflection that you're talking about, the one thing that we would want them to be able to do is it wrapped around collaborative inquiry? What kind of reflection might that look like? John Hattie said to me a long time ago, if you're reflecting without evidence, then you're just remembering it the way you think it happened, not the way that it did. So what we would look at too is, from an actionable step, if you're going to take that time to be in your office, if you're going to take that time to go to professional learning, make sure it's tied to those priorities that you care about. And what evidence are you bringing with you so you can look at it and see how you're actually showing growth?
Okay, I want to go even a little further with that. So Michael, can you just share like maybe a success story with a school or district in regards to implementing the collective inquiry effectively, and kind of the shift or power that came within that strategy?
Sure. I think that, starting with the growth piece, it's really the mindset of small habits. I know
Sure.
Peter and I really profess that. And I'm going to share a quote that one of my good friends follows, Olivia Ann Rose, and she puts out a quote a day. And I wrote it out because I can't write a book immediately, but all these things are connecting. So it was like, I put this quote, not that we'll use it, Peter, but it's just like, growth is always visible, but it is always happening. The small choices, the quiet moments of reflection, the patience you show yourself, they all contribute to the fact that you are becoming exactly who you are meant to be, even when you're standing still. And so as we think about this work, it's having the mindset that's always open, that I'm going to always have this open mind to seeing all of the different things that are happening and trying to make myself a better leader and trying to make others a better leader. So in that, trying to build a culture that we believe is a culture of collective. So as you move through that collaborative inquiry cycle that we talk about in chapter 3 of our book, we also talk about chapter 4, the importance of building a network, building colleagues with each other. So a very quick example, I was principal of an elementary school. And when I first came in, I was hired in the spring before my contract started July 1st. So I got to do perceptions interviews. The staff didn't talk to each other. They came in side doors. They went to their classroom. They left. They were a building of individual people silos. And I think that's the image that Peter and I are trying to break down across classrooms, across schools, across systems, of the belief that working in the collective is far better than working in silos. And so they not only did they not know each other congenially, they did not know each other in a collegial manner. So when you look at the work, when you look at the research around joint work, it's counter to everything this building was. The great people, they just didn't connect. What we did was I asked them to bring in a 4x4 piece of material on the first day of the retreat, and that was important to them. 4x4 piece of material that was important to them. Okay, people freaked out a little bit. They called, they asked questions. What are you doing? What is this? And I just said, a 4x4 that's important to you. Like, okay. And I gave it to them months in advance. So before they left for the August retreat, they got it in June and they took it seriously. It's like that window of a brand new administrator. They were wanting to do this. We had people bring in a piece of their veil from their wedding dress that was tied to their mom's wedding dress. I mean, the stories. And we had somebody bring a 4x4 piece of their Speedo that they won the state championship in a relay race. The stories that came out. So not only were we, laughing, we were crying. Somebody brought a piece of material from their mother who just died. Mm-hmm. It was like all of a sudden the empathy factor came out. And it was like, oh my goodness, we continued. But during the perceptions interview, I knew that we had a quilter in the group. And so this person, I said, okay, school was Camelot. Can you make it into a quilt that has the image of a castle? And can the castle be parts of everybody's material? Got it. It was a 3-day retreat. On the third day, read the story of the rag coat. All of a sudden, which is the story of the little girl that didn't have a coat, and all the mothers came together and they built a rag coat, a quilted coat. And this person built this quilt. We held it out, tears. All of a sudden, we were becoming a group. Now, it's one story, but it was a powerful anchor of being a congenial. We moved that into, okay, here are strategies that we are going to begin to implement. Our staff meetings are going to be in your classrooms. Who would like to sign up first? Let's break down some of those walls through those strategies and becoming a network of learners, which we talk about in chapter 4. So long story connecting into both the chapter 1, 2 of human interconnectedness and then how to build a network.
All right, y'all, if you are watching on YouTube, over Michael's shoulder, you're going to see their fantastic design for their cover of their book, but Leading with Intention, How School Leaders Can Unlock Deeper Collaboration and Drive Results. Highly recommend this book. We'll make sure that the link is in the show notes for everyone to pick that up. Michael, you had touched on something just at the beginning of that quote that you said, and you said new book. So Peter, is there potentially a new book between the two of you?
There is a new book between the two of us that we have to have into our editor by March. So We're actually working on a book focused on collective leader efficacy. And awesome. In our work, there are 3 main areas that we look at, which is shared understanding. How do you develop a shared understanding? Because lots of schools have a shared language, but they don't have a shared understanding about that language. Michael just talked about joint work. So how do you engage in joint work? And number 3 is how do you evaluate your own impact? So we're going very deeply into those 3 areas, which is what we've been working on in our long-term hybrid work. So it should be out in the fall of this year.
Wonderful. Can't wait for that to be out. So everyone take a look on their social media, on their websites, and make sure you're grabbing that resource also. And then the long-term hybrid model. Michael, do you want to share a little bit about that also?
Yes, as Peter mentioned, oftentimes you get asked to come in and do just a workshop and then you leave and you don't know the impact that you have. And both of us were educators that really connected everything that we did. So, for example, our staff meetings, from one staff meeting to the next staff meeting when Peter and I were principals, they connected in terms of they were about learning. One meeting connected to the next meeting. The same is true in a hybrid approach. We have built relationships with provinces in Canada and school districts across North America where not only do we do keynotes, but we will check in with them monthly virtually with teams, and the learning from one event to the next event happens, and we can see long-term progress. They can see it in themselves. Districts see it overall, and it really is a magical way to have adult learning occur within school systems.
For that, where could they find more information? Because it's true, it's one and done. Sometimes you get really excited, you get enthused because of that event, but it's better to have it on a longer runway. So where can folks find more information about that specifically?
They can just go to our website, which is the Instructional Leadership Collective.
Awesome.
So they can find all of the information about the books, the work that, Michael and I write the Finding Common Ground blog together for Education Week, and we have a podcast with Corwin, so they can find all that information there.
Beautiful. Love all the resources. So we'll make sure that's also in the show notes. And then I'm going to ask you guys, and I would love for both of you to answer this question. I think it's really important, is that actionable item, right? So they're learning from your book, maybe from your podcast, your blogs, but we'd love for them to do something. So if there's one thing they can do tomorrow or next week to enhance their leadership journey, what would you recommend?
I'm going to give just a practical strategy as my answer. What I believe we are as adults, we're visual learners, and the connection of learning from one event to the next. I think one of the greatest strategies that I've ever used is in one meeting, let's say a staff meeting, there's 2 to 3 pictures of what occurred during that meeting. The slideshow that we open with at the following meeting shows those pictures of what occurred. And so that pictorial timeline of learning, and that can be used across walls so staff can see that learning occur, I think is a powerful journey to know that learning is continuous. I'm here with you as a leader. Let's do this together, building that collegiality.
We always use success criteria. So, principals always expect teachers to have success criteria in the classroom, but when we ask them, do you have it for your meetings? They don't. So the use of success criteria is huge. When you were asking that question about reflection from before, our ability to create success criteria with our staff, or whether we're doing it for a staff meeting or whether we're doing it for an instructional leadership team meeting, that ability to sit there with staff and talk about what would success look like at the end of this meeting. And that would actually bring in those actionable steps, but it would also bring in a depth of the fact that we're here to learn from one another. Too often it's always about, let's get rid of these tasks, or let's, get through the list of management stuff. When you're developing success criteria with your staff for whatever that meeting might be, it can actually have that deep learning effect. It can lead to what would be the next actionable step that we should be engaged in. And it also models what we want to see in classrooms. And I think that it would do a few of the things, all of the things that we've just talked about, whether it's human interconnectedness, the whole idea of internal and external self-awareness. Developing success criteria helps us understand that. And then it's also going to help us with those actionable items that we're looking at. And it just creates a more coherent focus within our schools too. So success criteria would be the one I would mention.
Wonderful. All right. So we've touched on a website for folks to be able to go to, but if anyone has additional questions or just want to connect with you just to find out more of the resources that you construct, how may they do that?
Absolutely. I think our website is a great place to start. We also have Instructional Leadership Collective accounts both on Facebook and on Instagram. Perfect. And we are both on Blue Sky.
Wonderful. Peter, do you have any other?
Yeah, Michael's phone number is. Yeah. If you're looking to connect with us individually too, Michael is Suit Guy Mike on Instagram, and I'm just Peter DeWitt on Instagram as well. So you can find us individually there as well. Michael is a gourmet chef. So if you go to Suit Guy Mike, you can look for some of his amazing recipes that he cooks.
So is that true?
I do like to cook.
So you're not going to say the gourmet term.
Gourmet, Joshua, I'm telling you, gourmet.
All right. Well, hopefully, Michael, we can meet in person and I can get some of that gourmet cooking, because that sounds phenomenal.
You are welcome. You are welcome anytime.
Well, gentlemen, you are amazing. I love your resources, your podcast, everything that you're doing. Peter, you already know how I feel about you as we've connected before, but Michael, it's been a pleasure and honor to meet you today. I'm super excited about the new book that's coming out for the two of you here in a couple of months, and just the way that you're supporting educators, not just in the country, but all over the world. And I just appreciate you both so much.
Thank you, Joshua, for having us. It's so great to see you again.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
This podcast is a proud member of the Teach Better Podcast Network. Better today, better tomorrow, and the podcast to get you there. Explore more podcasts at teachbetter.com/podcasts, and we'll see you at the next episode.